Welcome everyone. My name is Doug Cook and I'm your co-host for tonight. I'm the Education and Events Coordinator for NOFA Mass. And along with me is Carol Roselle, NOFA Mass Education Director. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank all of the NOFA Mass staff and board who have contributed to the production of this webinar, the second in a series of 5 events focused on improving your pastures and products with intensive grazing practices. We also like to thank our grant funders, the Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation Green Pastures Fund, and it's a fund to preserve and encourage small community-based agricultural ventures in the Berkshires, and Massachusetts Dairy Farmers. To learn more about Massachusetts dairy farmers, visit massdairy.com. Most importantly, we want to thank you, the viewers and listeners, especially our members who make our education and advocacy work possible. If you find this event useful and inspiring, please become a NOFA Mass member or consider making a donation to support our important work. I'm pleased to introduce our presenters, Bob Richardson and Kate Parsons. Bob runs Rocky Acres Farm in Warren, Mass. Rocky Acres Farm sells raw milk on site and is a proud member of the Agrimark Cabot Cooperative. In 2015, 16, and 17, Rocky Acres Farm was presented with the award for top overall milk quality for our over 1,200 farms in the Agrimark Milk Cooperative. You can learn more about them at www.rockyacresmilk.com. And Kate Parsons has worked for the National Resource Conservation Service for almost 18 years and has served as the soil health specialist for the last 5 years. She provides support to the NRCS conservation planners and farmers across Massachusetts with soil health, grazing, and other agronomic concerns. Outside of NRCS, Kate spends a portion of her time planting corn and cover crops using no-till and rotational grazing, dairy heifers, or beef cows on her family's dairy in West Hampton, Massachusetts. And Caro is going to start.
Hello, hi. So I'm Caro. I'm with NOFA Mass, the Education Director, and I'll be interviewing Bob Richardson, who is joining in by phone right now. So I think, Doug, you were going to share your screen to share Bob's photographs, and Bob will be talking with us over the phone. So we are going to go ahead and start with your photos now, Bob, and we have your pasture clover picture coming up.
Yes, good evening. I'd like to describe our grazing program here at Rocky Acres Farm. The first picture that's on the screen is presently where the cows are grazing. We move our herd pretty quickly. We give them an area during the day and a new area at night. So they've always got fresh feed in front of them. And this picture shows what's the mix there. It's white clover, a little bit of red clover, some native grass, orchard grass. And as you can see, this is the second time through. The first time was about 35 days ago. And when we first started, the soils were so cold and wet that it took a while for them to take off after the first rotation through. And then as soon as the soil warmed up, everything just took right off. So you're going to see in that photo that there is some tall native grasses in there. And of course the cows really like the stuff that's 8 to 10 inches tall, but they do eat the taller growth. So they get a pretty fair variety there. And but now the second time through, it's getting very dry in this area. So we're concerned about the regrowth for the next time around, but hopefully we'll have some moisture here fairly soon.
Should we move on to the next photo, or do you have more to say about the clover shot?
Next photos be fine.
Great. So just to ask a clarifying question, so you have a mix of orchard grass, clovers, and native grasses?
Yes.
Great. So the next photo, Doug, is that up? My internet's a little too slow to see it.
Yes, the clover and a measuring stick to measure the depth of the grasses and clover.
That's that's in the same area where the cows are. Presently, I took that picture just to show the height of it. It's about 8 to 10 inches tall. Some is a little bit taller, the older grasses or whatever, but they still do a pretty decent job of grazing it down. I like to put them in an area like that where it's about 10 inches tall, and then where we move them so fast, I like to see about 3 to 4 inches of growth left, because I don't want them to chew it down to the dirt, and because of the regrowth, and especially now we're so dry. So we are giving them slightly larger areas right now so they don't take it down too tight, and hopefully we can still get some regrowth for the next trip around.
So you move them based on the height of the pasture?
Yes.
Not by other factors. That's your primary factor.
That's the
height.
primary thing, yes, because I'm out to support production and to keep the girls happy, because if they don't have these paddocks 8 to 10 inches tall with a nice regrowth, we hear about it.
I see.
That is the one thing in grazing. The cows will tell you how they're doing, if they're happy with what's there, and if they take it down fairly, like I say, 3 to 4 inches regrowth, then they're doing a pretty good job. But the cows tell the story. You have to watch the cows.
And so, just curious about that. How densely do you typically stock your pastures, or does it really depend on weather factors?
Well, it depends on several things. It depends on growth and the moisture levels, of course. But we graze in about 45 mature cows presently, and so we have to really watch what they do, because, like I say, we don't want these areas grazed too tight, and that's why we move them pretty quick. And they are trained. We'll get into this a little later. Trained electric fence. We only run one strand of temporary wire in these paddocks, and my wife and I can use temporary posts and wire on reels, and we run water to them. That's another thing we can talk about a little later. We run water to them everywhere they go, and so we got to keep them happy, and production will stay up there for us.
As you mentioned moving, I progressed to the next photo showing us a grazed section and a ungrazed section.
Right. That was for the heifers, the breeding age heifers. The area on the right, that was their first day out, and I wanted to give them a big area. So there's 21 of them. And even though they're trained to fences pretty well, the first day out, they just run around and have a good time, and I want to make sure that they stayed where I wanted them. And so you'll see a height difference to the right and to the left. And we kept them in there for about 3 days, just days only. We brought them back into the heifer facility at night and gave them some dry hay, their grain mineral. And then we put them out, like I say, in that one area for 3 days, and then we moved them on to the next area on the left side of that picture. And we gave them a little smaller area because they had simmered down pretty well and got into a routine of grazing. They were happy to go graze. And so we tightened up the area a little bit. And in fact, that field, we gave them one more area besides those two. And then we moved them to our upper farm, and that's where they presently are until we'll bring them back to the home farm here probably this week sometime for another area.
Mm-hmm. So you're moving about every few days, except then you go out for a period of time to a larger pasture, and then you resume moving them? We move the cows twice a day. The heifers we move probably 4 to 5 days, depends on where they are, what the feed is. Currently, the breeding age heifers are up to our other farm, so we don't move them as fast as we do the cows because they're in different areas, different grass types and that kind of thing. And we started breeding them first of the month. So. Gotcha. Mm-hmm. And so how many total acres are you grazing right now?
We're grazing now approximately 30 acres, and as we take some of the acreage off for baleage or dry hay, that acreage will be brought in through the rotation when it gets up to desired height. And by fall, we usually have 60, 65 acres in rotation, possibly more, depends on the fall and the summer growth. If we get into normal precipitation, then maybe we don't have as much into grazing. We'll take that second or third off as baleage or dry hay, or if we need it for grazing, we'll put it into the grazing rotation. But presently, we're about 25 to 30 acres at the moment.
So interesting. So you have about 20 to 30. You're grazing about 30 acres with
Just
some of
cow.
that. Yeah. Okay. Yep. With 45 cows, you said.
Yes, approximately.
Great. And you are grazing some of the same pastures you might be cutting for hay or baleage, but you might also be grazing those same acres occasionally.
Right. We usually we try to rotate the acreage and not stay grazing the same acreage year after year. We may take them off for baleage early after 3 years of grazing, skip a year grazing, go back to baleage and bring another piece that we've taken off for baleage in other years and put that into the grazing that particular year. We try to rotate these fields so we're not stuck in a mode where we just use some of these fields just for grazing. We try to rotate them.
That's really interesting.
We find that rotating and through that it really enhances the clover makeup of the acreage, and grazing does promote the white clover because the white clover seems to be in the soil bank. So we don't have to sow much seed on these fields. It just if you graze it right and feed it right, and then give it a rest and take it off for baleage, don't take quite as much off those years, those fields rather, for baleage as we would for grazing, and then put them back into grazing rotation maybe in the third year. We see quite a bit of impressive growth doing that.
That's really interesting. So we do have a few questions for you about your actual seeding practices and what varieties you're using. But I also know you have a few more pictures you want to show us. So should I ask you that question, or do you want us to proceed to the next photo in your series?
I can answer that question at this point.
Great.
Our seeding, we usually do it in the spring. We do it a number of ways. It depends on the spring and what we need in the fields. We have done no-till seeding, just interseeding into the sod without interrupting what's there.
So can you explain that a little bit? Sorry, just for the folks who might not be familiar. So you're using a no-till drill to do that, and you're just seeding basically certain crops, cover crops or pasture species right into the existing pasture.
Yes, it's pasture mix. It's not a cover crop. We don't use herbicide to knock out what's there. We usually graze it tight, either with the cows or the heifers the fall before, if we've got a field that we want to interseed or reseed. And so then we'll go in with the no-till probably end of April. And that particular field that we'll seed, sometimes we'll take that off as baleage and not graze it so hard so the new seeding has a chance to survive, especially if it comes off hot in the early June. And we like to go in there and take those fields that we no-till like that and mow them high, mow them 4 or 5 inches tall. That provides some shade for the new seeding to come along, and then maybe put it back into the grazing rotation later on in the season.
Interesting. And so there's a question about what are the native grasses that you are seeding? Are you actively seeding the native grasses, or are they just showing up in the seed bank?
No, they're just showing up in the seed bank. When we reseed, we will reseed a little bit of Timothy. We can't seem to keep Timothy more than 2 years. And then it's orchard grass, different varieties of orchard grass. They have late maturing now orchard grasses and that sort of thing. And we don't usually put in any clover, or if we do, it's red clover, maybe a few pounds to the acre, because that doesn't seem to last long either. It's the white clover that's in the soil bank and the soil naturally that we try to enhance. And
interesting.
It seems to be working with grazing very well. We have it's just mats of white clover, and some of our forage samples will come back 20 to 25% crude protein.
Wow. And so you don't usually, do you ever plow up your pasture and then reseed it? It sounds like you're mostly just seeding into the sod after grazing.
We haven't plowed here for, I'd say, probably the mid-70s.
Wow, that's amazing.
We've gone no-till with pretty much everything, or frost seeding, or I've even sowed seed right in front of the cows, and they've punched it in if you get a kind of a wet spring, and that does work. We've seen some pretty decent results with that, and of course frost seeding. But you need the perfect crack, if you will, for frost seeding to work, and that just works pretty well with the clover, which I don't like to seed too much of that, but we do seed orchard grass and a little bit of timothy. But those seeds are kind of difficult to get into frost seeding because they're light and fluffy. They don't fall into cracks that well, unless you can do it in front of a rain or a light snow, and then that just melts it right into the cracks. So it does work.
That's really interesting. That's really cool. Maybe we should talk a little bit about the benefits you've seen from these specific practices that you're describing. So maybe we could look at the soil test, Doug, and you can share about what you've seen over the many years that you've been doing this no-till grass-based system.
Oh, sure. I've got some soil samples here that were taken last September, I believe. And a couple of things that I look at first is organic matter and then the pH. Now, we took samples in 5 fields last September, and they range the organic matter levels range from 7.5 to 10. And the one with the 10% organic material is one of my higher producing fields. And that one is in the picture that we've already taken the baleage off, and we're waiting for regrowth to come back, and then 8 to 10 inches, and we'll put them into the rotational grazing. And we'll get not only the baleage, but we'll get probably 4 rotations through that field anyway this year, if we get moisture here within the next week or so. I'm very concerned about how dry it's getting.
We have a comment from one of our attendees. Wow, those organic matter levels are awesome here in, is that Missouri? Sorry, M-O. Yeah, Missouri. We're lucky if we can get 5. So where did you start? Do you remember? Did you take a lot of soil tests when you first started farming in the 70s? And what were your organic matter levels then? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head. I think there were 5-6%.
Yep.
And then, like I said, we started grazing in 1989. And so we've been building the soils, if you will, with just what the cows drop on the fields. Plus, like I said in our interview earlier, I'll still spread manure on these fields in the fall that we graze. Not as heavy as the fields we mechanically harvest, but we give them a shot. And then we watch the pH pretty closely. We try to put lime on when. Maybe not every year, but it kind of depends on the milk truck, how things are going, how much lime, when and if we put lime on. But now we're looking real seriously at microfeeding this land with potassium levels and the calcium levels. I'm really interested in the potassium levels, and we wanted to put some on these particular fields last fall, but we just couldn't get the truck on because it was so wet, and we couldn't get them on in this spring. So we may go ahead and put it on ourselves field by field with a fertilizer sower. We may do it that way rather than try to get all the fields covered.
That's great. And so just a couple more questions before we switch to Kate, and then we'll have more opportunity to ask you some questions after Kate's presentation. But I was wondering so it sounds like you're starting to get into fertilizing your fields. That's a first for you? You haven't fertilized them much in the past except for through manure and.
We've tried putting on urea fertilizer after the first kind of baleage for the grazing, and to be honest with you, I didn't see enough growth for the return. It's fairly expensive. So we kind of shying away from that practice now. We're just relying on what the cows put on and the manure applications that we put on. And like I say, now I'm getting really interested in microfeeding these fields now with potassium and that kind of thing. And of course, pH. I'm not too gung-ho on adding urea at this point anymore. I just don't think the return versus cost.
Right. And what do you think it is about that really high producing field that distinguishes it? Why is the organic matter so high, and what makes it so good?
I think it's one of my wetter fields, and I think the moisture has a lot to do with it. It's one of my lower fields below the main farm barn, and that's the only thing that I can see different than some of my other fields is the moisture level, because the pasture beside it is real wet, and even now it's so dry that most of that field is ahead of most everything else we have at this point, and I just think it's a moisture level.
Interesting. Great. So just two more questions, because I did want to ask you about how rotational grazing and seasonal milking goes hand in hand. So maybe we can show the picture of the calves, Doug. And we were wondering what time of year do the cows freshen?
Okay, we dry them off right around Christmas, and then they're dry January, February, and we start calving again in early March through April, and then very early in May. Mm-hmm. And the reason we've started seasonal was because of production costs. We got so we weren't calving out anybody in January because of the extra effort to raise calves because of temperature changes, and to try to maintain production with the weather swings, real cold, the warm-ups and this sort of thing. And so, and then we live on top of a hill here, and it's 1,000-foot elevation. And so then the dairy co-ops and the grain companies started putting tractor trailers on, and it was just a nightmare trying to get the trucks in and out of here and up this road and down the road. And that was one factor, but it's mostly production costs, where we could control production. And so what we saw was that when we calve them out in the spring, we still have them on barn feed, and so we can peak them pretty high on steward feed. And then once we turn them out to grazing and the grass is 8 to 10 inches tall, we can continue that peak of production for quite a while. And then, of course, you've got, they're out on grass. It's much easier when they're on grass and they're out in the open, and you can watch them and observe them than you can in the barn. It was the whole picture of why we went seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think so too.
So we do have a lot of background noise, so it's a little hard to hear, Bob. I'm wondering if you can all check to make sure that you're on mute, and if you're not, please mute yourself. Thanks, folks. So I guess if you could just give us a brief overview, and then we're going to switch to Kate, just about how you think about your grass and pasture management in relationship to your seasonal milking practices.
Well, first of all, you never want to think every year's different. So this year was quite different than last year. Last year was a wet year. We had feed everywhere. This year is starting to tighten up. Like I said earlier, I'm getting quite concerned about moisture levels in some of these fields. And but the overall health of the cows, much better. The soil health is better because the cows are grazing it, and the sun gets into the fields, and the clover comes in, and the clover, as you know, is a legume, and so that feeds the native grasses with some of the nitrogen requirements, and it's just everything just seems to go hand in hand with this, with the grazing and whatever, and it's just a way for us to control production costs. That's the bottom line.
That's great.
we just had the latest lab results come in from Agamark today for the last shipment of milk out of here the day before yesterday, and somatic cell count, tank somatic cell stands at 21,000.
Well, I'm not a dairy farmer, so I'll just have to leave that to others to know if that's a good result.
Right, okay.
Great. Well, we have gone a little bit over time in chatting with you, Bob, so I think we'll switch to Kate's presentation now, and then we'll come back to ask you some more questions afterwards. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
All right, Kate, you can take over.
Thank you so much, Kate. Looking forward to hearing your presentation. Kate's going to give us a little bit about growing feed for cows using soil health practices.
Yeah. So Carol asked me to speak about growing corn, whether it's for grain or silage. I'll focus mostly on silage since that's what our dairy farmers are growing. So just a few of the things I'd like to cover is the soil health principles that all increase carbon in the soil together, the conservation practices implemented by Massachusetts dairy farmers that are growing corn, and financial assistance through NRCS that's available for farmers. So to grow quality feed cost effectively and sustainably, we need to focus on building soil organic matter. No brainer, right? Like obviously everyone knows their high organic matter fields tend to produce better than the low organic matter fields. So soil organic matter, if people aren't familiar, is approximately 58% carbon. So if we increase organic matter, we are sequestering carbon into the soil and reducing atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. So basically, as our dairy farmers are increasing organic matter, it's a win-win for the farmer and for the environment. This is just a picture of a high organic matter resilient soil showing that it's well aggregated. So the soil, the silt and sand and clay particles are held together by humus, by plant roots, by fungal hyphae, so that the water is able to infiltrate. And this would be a low organic matter field that disperses readily upon rainfall impact. So, and all of this happens with the soil food web driving it, the sun driving it to photosynthesizing plants, giving off carbon and root exudates, and then the microbes feeding on those and producing substances and all the things that make this well aggregated soil happen in these roots here so we need our plants and we need our microbes. So NRCS has kind of put out there the 4 soil health principles that support these well aggregated high functioning resilient soils with a lot of organic matter. So the principles are minimize disturbance, maximize soil cover, maximize biodiversity, and maximize continuous living roots. So 2 of them here are kind of looked at as feeding the soil biology, improving organic matter in terms of maximizing living roots. And we're doing that through cover crops and through perennials. And then also maximizing biodiversity. The more diversity we have above ground, the more diversity we have below ground. So the dairy farmers are doing multi-species cover crop rotation, and perennials. And then the protect side is we need to minimize disturbance. So no-till, nutrient management, and pest management, and maximize soil cover. So basically the combination of cover crop and no-till. And mulching is another practice, although not so commonly used by dairy farmers as they are growing their own mulch in the cover crop. So simply put, grow a cover crop with different species, let it get big in the spring. Manure will help it get big and feed the microbes as well. Don't till the soil. Don't overuse pesticides and fertilizers or compact the soil. Rotate to hay or another crop. The corn hay rotation versus continuous corn. So why corn silage? Not all farms have the land base for pasture around their headquarters. Some farms are bigger to support more families. For a variety of reasons, farmers are growing corn silage. It's a high yielding, high energy, and relatively consistent source of forage. It's highly digestible and palatable. And it's the combination of energy from starch and digestible fiber provides for a healthy diet when combined with a protein source and minerals. So just some corn chopped up, packed in a bunk, and fermented. So soil health systems for corn silage always include a cover crop. And then the cover crop is terminated either late with a roller crimper or potentially terminated early or late with a herbicide, but no plowing or disking. And the reason we always include a cover crop, you know, you can imagine the different root structures here. You need these to aerate the soil and loosen it up in the spring for those corn plants to follow the same channels created by the roots. So I wanted to present farmer's system. This would be the cover crop. Let the cover crop grow big and roller crimp it and no-till the corn into it. So this is Will Rogers. NOFA has a story on him here on their website that you can take a look. He's located in Warren, Mass. So with this system, planning really starts like a year and a half in advance. You first need to order corn seed that's shorter maturity date. And then at harvest the previous year, you need to harvest early so that you can get your cover crop planted. So in this situation, September 14th, he's chopping his corn and has someone on the no-till drill right behind it. So it starts with a thick uniform cover crop. In this situation, he had planted rye, crimson clover, and radish, but I think it was radish, my screen is blocked, but definitely a thick stand of rye is critical, and you'll see why. So there's the no-till drill, just showing kind of the workings of a no-till drill here. There's a coulter that cuts the residue, and then some openers and a closer here. So in order to kill the rye, it needs to be in the pollination stage. So you should sort of see a yellow haze over the field if you walk in and end up with pollen in your hair and such. So this is the rye that's pollinating. And you also need a thick cover up to 8,000 pounds to the acre to hold back the weeds for the whole season. So this is what he does. He's got the roller crimper mounted on the front of the tractor and then a 2-row no-till planter in the back, so the widths line up. And the key adaptation that he had to make was this residue slicer that I'll show in the next slide. And then these are just the regular seed openers and the closers behind there. So the trench is opened and then closed through that thick mat. So here's the residue slicer. This is kind of a unique thing where these two rubber wheels hold the rye down like you're holding a piece of paper and then cut it. And look at the nice slice it makes through. Because picture these two discs trying to cut a path through all that without that slice there. So it's quite effective. And he also has cast iron closing wheels, which are a little heavier than the factory wheels, which are rubber, to help close the trench through all that residue. And it's very important to check your seed depth and adjust accordingly to make sure you're getting that seed at least 2 inches in the soil. You can also install planter mounted crimpers. These cost about $1,500 a row unit. So it kind of basically works in a similar system, but it would be on the planter. So just to recap, this is an amazing picture here showing this residue, like just completely awesome, no soil moving, no runoff, water infiltrating. So we've hit our 4 principles in terms of, you know, maximizing soil cover and biodiversity, continuous living roots. Now the system, I don't want to paint like it's always perfect. Here, these are the ones where it did work out well. The corn emerged. He did have to roll it a couple times because it did stand up, probably because he had a combination of plants that weren't all at pollination stage. But for this field, it was very good weed control with no herbicide, and the corn looks pretty good too. So this field was rolled a little early And basically the corn really suffered because I think he may have rolled it a second time or continued to roll it, but it just kept regrowing because, you know, it was done too early. You really have to wait until it's at pollination stage. I said here that he had some triticale in there, and that heads out later than the rye. So people are tending to go with the rye for earlier maturing. So you can see, like, it's really fun for us to go out and look at all the earthworm activity, decomposing there under the rye or the material. And, you know, the corn was excellent. So this was his first year doing it. You know, he had a lot of decomposition, but still had material left there covering the soil at the end of the year. So the advantages are, like, I don't even need to go over. There are many multitude of advantages. It hits all the principles and limits the disturbance with herbicides. There's a few drawbacks, you know, because we're promoting this with other farmers, and a few are interested, but you'd have to plant towards the end of May. Typically, farmers are planting the end of April to the middle to the third week of May. You must harvest by early September. This requires a shorter day length corn, which tends to yield lower than the longer day that farmers are typically planting. The potential for the cover crop not to die, weeds to emerge and compete with the corn, and it does require a high level of management. So it's quite a shift from what farmers have been doing, and, you know, something that you would probably typically only do this for a couple of years, and then your perennial weeds are going to start to creep up on you. So this is another system that the dairy farmers are doing, where they are planting a cover crop the same, no tilling and spraying a herbicide to terminate the wheat or rye. So here you can see, like, still a massive amount of material, the cover crop or the corn emerging and coming up through. So same type of residue protecting the soil, as you can see it here. So no runoff, no erosion, lots of infiltration, very active worm population. This was first year no-till here, and he already had all that. This farmer was growing wheat, already all decomposed. They're working on the corn stalks from the previous year. This here, I believe, was also first year no-till up in Williamstown, and a very stony field, but a lot of earthworms as well. So really biologically active soils with this system. This was during the drought year. You can see this was where the cover crop was tilled in. Here was no-till, and the corn looked remarkably better where the no-till had preserved the moisture. So this is the alternative to these two cover crop corn no-till systems that I've just discussed. And I hate to admit, but this is a field of my own farms, my family's. This was a vineyard for the last few years, just a small rental piece up the road. So we had to plow it to get rid of the 3-foot holes where the vines were, and look at the rocks I had to pick. So this is what a typical tillage system might look like. Moldboard plow, 2 to 3 disc passes, pick rocks, plant, cultivate. Now if you're organic, cultivate 3 to 4 times, or apply a herbicide. So, and I planted this field in the dust. I tried to take some pictures showing the dust here. So really just not fun. I don't like to see this. When I'm planting no-till, I'm dodging toads and moving them out of the way if they don't hop out of the way. I saw 3 baby rabbits, like, in some of our, like, really tall cover crop. I've seen a wood turtle, snakes. I mean, it's really fun, the amount of activity you see in your cover crop. So, you can't see my thing here, but no-till definitely saves time, fuel, wear and tear on equipment, improves soil health. So a lot of farmers are adopting the no-till that I've just discussed. It's gotten popular across the state, probably for a reduced cost, and just seeing the benefits in terms of the environment and their crop and getting on the land. They're also doing a lot of cover crop. I worked for NRCS, we didn't really cover that. I guess we covered that, but so these are sort of some of the acreages where dairy farmers have received financial assistance to plant cover crops, and they're planting diversity too, so rye, oats, and radish. Thanks to the MDAR acre grant. A lot of farms have gotten no-till drills, and these are some of the farms that have, you know, bought into no-till and soil health. So they are no-till drilling their cover crop now. A lot of this had been aerially seeded. The aerial seeding can have mixed results. And there's still some that, you know, if you don't have a drill, you do have to lightly harrow it in. So just a few pictures. This is kind of one of my favorite mixes for those farmers who can get their cover crop or their corn off in time. Here's my time is up, but wheat, crimson clover, radish. This is our mix with the aerial. But for the later farmers, it's typically wheat, triticale, or this was a field of mine that's wheat and rye. I don't like, a lot of farmers don't like straight rye because it can get so big on them and shade the corn. So I did a combination and I got better fall coverage with the rye. So cover crops are an expense. So some farmers harvest them prior to planting the cash crop. These are our beef cows. This certainly could be dairy cows or heifers. So this was wheat. This was a section of rye. I put on more of a sloped part of the field. So we saved a lot of grazing days, let our pasture recover and regrow grazing cover crops on our corn land here. This is a group of our heifers where I had no-tilled oats and peas in the spring on a piece of land that I wanted to improve the organic matter on. And we followed it up with the raised crazy mix in early June, which is the Sudan grass, cowpea, sunflower radish. So both pictures here are the crazy mix. Yeah, it was interesting. Definitely want to rotational subdivide it. A lot of farmers are double cropping triticale and corn. This is the Melnick family that's doing that and finding success, and then they no-till the corn into it after. And just a slide showing crop rotation to hay. Okay, two more minutes are fine. So adding hay to the rotation builds a root system for several years, a perennial root system, and you know, adds some diversity to the soil and some nitrogen through the legume. And then after 4 to 5 years, corn is no-tilled into the hay stand, and you can see the serious earthworm activity again there. So a healthy soil. So funding is available. People can contact their local NRCS office and inquire about that. We provide assistance for cover crop, basically all the practices I talked about. And we also do test plots. So we're running short on time. I'm not going to talk too much about that. You can just see here, it's money to compare no-till and till. And so the Barstows were one of our participating farmers in 2017. They did a couple test plots. You can see there was really no difference in the corn. The measurements came out favorably, and they grow 210 acres of corn, and by 2020 they plan to be 100% no-till. And again, with when I say no-till, that means no-till and cover crop. So they're not the only one. There's several farms that have that are trying these test plots and converting to no-till. So yeah, so there's a lot of dairy farmers across the state that are following the 4 soil health principles in the systems that I explained, and you know, working on improving their soil to mimic the no-till ecosystem compared to you know, what you get with tillage. So I'll stop at that for now.
That's awesome. So I did see a bunch of questions coming in. So I think what I'll do is I'll ask you a few questions, Kate, about your presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions for both you and Bob. So one question that came up was whether there are no-till drills available in different parts of the state for renting or borrowing, as well as for, I think probably people are wondering about other equipment too, like a roller crimper.
Okay. The Berkshire Conservation District was able to purchase one through a grant, so they have one now. And as of right now, that's the only one that is owned by like a government agency or a nonprofit that I know of. I believe Stanton Equipment down in Connecticut rents one out. There's a few people that'll do custom, like Wagner Wood and Amherst has one, and they are available to hire.
That's great.
And then roller crimpers, I don't know if UMass would be mad. I was able to borrow theirs a couple years ago. They have 2 different sizes. The Hampshire district is hopefully potentially, they've applied for a grant where they might be able to get a roller crimper. So yeah, people are interested.
That's good. Related to roller crimping and cover cropping, so one thing that I've heard is that, you know, we're trying to achieve diversity. We're also trying to achieve no-till. So it seems like there's a little bit of a tension between getting a good diversity in your cover crop mix, but also having it be crimpable. So I'm wondering, I'm just sort of curious about what the maximum number of species you've seen successfully used in a mix that was able to be roller crimped.
I know. I mean, I've struggled with that myself, kind of with working with Will a little bit. Like I've always kind of felt like just stick to rye and I probably like 3, you know, the rye and crimson clover, and radish is okay because that's going to die typically anyways. But the more species you add, then you kind of tend to have to lessen the amount of small grain in there. So you don't really want to do that because you need the high biomass. And just to mention, Will did use rye and hairy vetch, and you have to wait until like mid-June to crimp that because it pollinates. So actually you got to wait till like early pod for that to die. So that didn't work out very well for him.
Interesting. I do hear about people using rye and vetch as a crimpable mix. So it's interesting to hear that that didn't work for him. But that's with vegetable farms, so they might have a different timing for their.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you wait till it's the right time, then you're good. But the dairy farmers can't wait that long for their corn.
Right.
I do refer to Cornell as doing quite a bit of research. There's a guy named Matt Ryan there that I'll contact for help sometimes doing organic no-till with roller crimpers. So they could maybe Google his information.
Awesome. So someone wanted to know if they're on a smaller scale and without a crimper, is chop and drop possible with something like rye? Like assuming maybe with a scythe or a one of those sickle mowers?
Yeah, this question has come up from one of our planners. I tried it in my garden a few years back, and I don't remember if the rye grew back, but I definitely had like some orchard grass in there and perennials that, you know, you can't have in the stand if you want to have like, you know, the rye die and have nothing else. But I mean, the cover crop manuals will say that doing that at the proper time, definitely full pollination, that it'll kill it. I don't have really firsthand experience with it. I don't know if you do from the vegetable side. But like I said, managing cover crops profitably says that system will work.
Interesting. Yeah, one thing we've educated about is some folks are having success using kind of like a traditional crimpable cover crop mix and then using a board crimper, which is basically just ropes and a board and just like crimping it with their feet by stomping on the board. So there's some information about that on our website. Interesting. One more question. When grazing cover crops, do you allow access to hay or other additional feeds in there, or are they just pretty much eating the cover crop?
Yeah, we pretty much just only given them they've had just the cover crop. Didn't really do a transition either. Maybe that wouldn't be a bad idea, but the beef cattle are a little more forgiving, I feel like, than the dairy, say, heifers and especially cows.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think we'll open. Bob, are you still here? Great. So do folks have questions for either Kate or Bob having to do with either topic or maybe the integration of them? Because I'm hearing about some amount of grazing of vegetable or corn lands as well. Well, I'll jump in. I did wonder, Kate, if there's any programs through NRCS that actually support farmers to improve their manure management on dairies.
Yeah, absolutely. We provide technical and financial assistance for nutrient management planning. So farmers can have a comprehensive nutrient management plan developed. And then there's financial assistance to implement that. So that would be, taking soil tests, which many of the farmers are doing anyways, and analyzing the manure nutrients, and then applying the manure according to soil tests and any additional nutrients that are needed. So we've done quite a few over the past years and helped with manure storages and such. And then the nutrient management is a key part to make sure the manure is managed to benefit the crop and protect the environment. So yeah, it's a big part of what we've done in the past. The fewer farmers, unfortunately, the dairy industry is suffering right now. So there probably won't be as many manure storages in the future.
So you also have programs for prescribed grazing, right? So are you actually working with Bob? Bob, are you enrolled in that program?
No, not presently, no.
Okay.
I think we worked in the past, right, Bob? I believe some with prescribed grazing.
We worked with Steve Herbert years ago. Tom Aiken. You've been here a number of times at different pasture walks. So we worked with Extension and the Mossad. I worked with Mossad too on different things. But nobody real recent within the last couple of years anyway.
Mm-hmm. So people can contact our office for technical assistance. The planners are trained to help basically with a variety of things, improving pastures, sizing paddocks, determine how much acreage is needed, estimating the amount of forage, giving out some grazing sticks like Bob had in his pictures. So yeah, feel free to contact us. And then there's financial assistance as well to implement the prescribed grazing plan that the planner can work with you as a farmer to develop. And then also money sometimes for fencing, perimeter or subdivisions, water lines, and watering facilities, animal trails if needed.
That's great. There's another question here wondering if funding and support through EQIP and other NRCS programs is primarily just available for farmers who are currently doing business, or is there funding available for farmers who are trying to scale up maybe from a homestead size to, a commercial farm?
Yeah, EQIP, it is more for farmers. Basically, EQIP is a program that addresses resource concerns. So if you have one cow, you probably don't have the biggest resource concern. If you have 10 cows and 5 acres fenced in for pasture, and you got another 10 acres of hayland nearby that you could graze, we could help. That would be a resource concern because you have a shortage of grazable land. We could potentially help fence that in and improve the pasture if need be. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not really the program for startup.
Yeah. Great. So I just have one more question for each of you. Bob, I was wondering if you ever do education on your farm where folks can come and see your farm and see your pastures.
We've had pasture walks with Steve Herbert in the past years, and through his office in UMass. I think the last one was about 4 years ago at the Twilight meeting. I think it was a number of years ago, but nothing too recent.
Well, maybe we should reach out to you to see if we can help organize something, because I think people could learn a lot by coming to your farm. Yeah, and sure. And Kate, one last question for you. What is Ray's Crazy Mix? And where can people get it?
Right. Well, that is sold by King's Agri-Seeds. And again, so I'm not promoting anything. I'm just listing something used. And I knew I should have grabbed exactly what's in, but there's 2 kinds of sorghum sudan in it. Like I said, a predominant portion is cowpea, so a summer legume. There's radish, oats, some of the other things I listed. But anyways, if you Google Ray's Crazy Mix, and that's named after Ray Archuleta, who sort of...
I was wondering.
got this soil health movement going. He was a former NRCS employee. My experience with that mix was, I think I maybe would have been better off with just straight Sudan grass. Like the cow, these were heifers. They didn't really love the cowpea like I thought they, I don't know. They seem to, and
Yeah, it's called cowpea, right?
right, I know. I waited till it was a little too tall and they kind of wasted some, but it seemed like you got more forage if you just planted straight to dang grass. But I also improved the soils.
Right.
Thanks.
Great.
Good try though.
Well, my internet just cut out. That's why my video feed disappeared. So I'm just on the phone with you all right now. So I apologize for disappearing like that. But I learned a lot in this, and I think if there are no more questions from the audience that Doug and Christy can see, then I think we will say thank you for your time, and we appreciate you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm really looking forward to the next meeting. Just so everyone knows, we have another event coming up. It is on Thursday, and we'll be hosting Michael Gallagher of Square Roots Farm to learn more about their intensively managed livestock systems. They are mostly a meat and egg producers. And along with Connor Stedman, who will explain the principles and practices of further developing pastures into silvopasture systems through functional tree planting here in New England. As well, NOFA's annual summer conference is going online for the first time from July 20th through June 9th, with over 60 workshops and speakers ranging from agroforestry to vermicomposting. This year's conference will not disappoint. Register today to sign up for this great opportunity to continue your education with more live events like this one. And additionally, events will be recorded for you to enjoy at your convenience. I want to say thank you again to our grant funders. That's the Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation, Green Pastures Fund, and Massachusetts Dairy Farmers. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks for being part of the NOFA Mass community.